The Bible, love it or hate it, is a book filled with puzzles and mysteries. It will be our task to unravel as many of them as possible. We want to understand the Bible as a human book, not a book inspired by a God. I'm Robert M. Price, and this is The Human Bible. I am your host, Robert M. Price, and this is The Human Bible. The Human Bible is a radio show and podcast of the Center for Inquiry, a think tank advancing science, reason, freedom of inquiry, and humanist values in public affairs and at the grassroots. And now let's start the show by hearing some exciting Bible news. Has to do with a manuscript decipherment, and this is from a source called livescience.com. You may have read it there, but you can indulge me if you haven't. I'm not going to read the whole darn thing, but here we go. A newly deciphered Egyptian text dating back almost 1,200 years tells part of the crucifixion story of Jesus with apocryphal plot twists, some of which have never been seen before. Written in the Coptic language, the ancient text tells of Pontius Pilate, the judge who authorized Jesus' crucifixion, having dinner with Jesus before his crucifixion and offering to sacrifice his own son in place of Jesus. It also explains why Judas used a kiss specifically to betray Jesus, because Jesus had the ability to change shape, according to the text, and it puts the day of the arrest of Jesus on Tuesday evening rather than Thursday evening, something that contravenes the Easter timeline. The discovery of the text doesn't mean these events happened, but rather that some people living at the time appear to have believed in them, said Roelof van der Broek of Utrecht University in the Netherlands, who published the translation in the book Pseudo-Cyril of Jerusalem on the life and passion of Christ. This is from Brill in 2013, so this is not some kind of a wacky new age or cheap sensationalist paperback or something, right? This is the real stuff if Brill put it out. Okay, back to the article. Copies of the text are found in two manuscripts, one in the Morgan Library and Museum in New York City and the other at the Museum of the University of Pennsylvania. Most of the translation comes from the New York text because the relevant text in the Pennsylvania manuscript is mostly illegible. While apocryphal stories about Pilate are known from ancient times, Vandenbroek wrote in an email to Live Science that he's never seen this one before, with Pilate offering to sacrifice his own son in the place of Jesus. Quote, "Without further ado, Pilate prepared a table, and he ate with Jesus on the 5th day of the week, and Jesus blessed Pilate and his whole house," reads part of the text in translation. Pilate later tells Jesus, "Well then, behold, the night has come, rise and withdraw, and when the morning comes, and they accuse me because of you, I shall give them the only son I have, so that they can kill him in your place." In the text, Jesus comforts him, saying, "O Pilate, you have been deemed worthy of a great grace, because you have shown a good disposition to me." Jesus also showed Pilate that he could escape if he chose to. Pilate then looked at Jesus, and behold, he became incorporeal. He did not see him for a long time. Pilate and his wife both have visions that night that show an eagle representing Jesus being killed. In the Coptic and Ethiopian churches, Pilate is regarded as a saint, which explains the sympathetic portrayal in the text, Vandenbroek writes. In the canonical Bible, the apostle Judas betrays Jesus in exchange for money by using a kiss to identify him, leading to Jesus' arrest. This apocryphal tale explains that the reason Judas used a kiss specifically is because Jesus had the ability to change shapes. Then the Jews said to Judas, "How shall we arrest him? For he does not have a single shape, but his appearance changes. Sometimes he is ruddy, sometimes he is white, sometimes he is red, sometimes he is wheat-colored, sometimes he is pallid like ascetics, sometimes he is a youth, sometimes an old man." This leads Judas to suggest using a kiss as a means to identify him. If Judas had given the arresters a description of Jesus, he could have changed shape. By kissing Jesus, Judas tells the people exactly who he is. This understanding of Judas's kiss goes way back. Vandenbroek writes, this explanation of Judas's kiss is first found in Origen. In his work Contra Celsum, the ancient writer Origen stated that to those who saw him, he did not appear alike to all. The text is written in the name of St. Cyril of Jerusalem, who lived in the 4th century. In the story, Cyril tells the Easter story as part of a homily. A number of texts in ancient times claimed to be homilies sermons by St. Cyril, and they were probably not given by the saint in real life, Vandenbroek explained in this book. Near the beginning of the text, Cyril, or the person writing his name, claims that a book has been found in Jerusalem showing the writings of the apostles on the life and crucifixion of Jesus. Listen to me, O my honored children, and let me tell you something of what we found written in the house of Mary, reads part of the text. Again, it's unlikely that such a book was found in real life. Vandenbroek says that a claim like this would have been used by the writer, quote, to enhance the credibility of the peculiar views and uncanonical facts he's about to present by ascribing them to an apostolic source, unquote, adding that examples of this plot device can be found frequently in Coptic literature. Vandenbroek says that he's surprised that the writer of the text moved the date of Jesus' Last Supper with the apostles and arrest to Tuesday. In fact, in this text, Jesus' actual Last Supper appears to be with Pontius Pilate. In between his arrest and supper with Pilate, he's brought before Caiaphas and Herod. In the canonical text, the Last Supper and arrest of Jesus happen on Thursday evening, and present-day Christians mark this event with Maundy Thursday services. By the way, what does Maundy mean? It means the Thursday of the mandate, the final command of Jesus, love one another. Anyway, it, quote, remains remarkable that Pseudo-Cyril relates the story of Jesus' arrest on Tuesday evening as if the canonical story about his arrest on Thursday evening, which was commemorated each year in the services of Holy Week, did not exist, writes Vandenbroek in the email. About 1,200 years ago, the New York text was in the library of the monastery of St. Michael in the Egyptian desert near present-day Al-Hamouli in the western part of the Fayum. The text says, in translation, that it was a gift from Archpriest Father Paul, who has provided for this book by his own labors. The monastery appears to have ceased operations around the 10th century, and the text was rediscovered in the spring of 1910. In December 1911, it was purchased along with other texts by American financier J.P. Morgan. His collections would later be given to the public and are part of the present-day Morgan Library and Museum in New York City. The manuscript is currently displayed as part of the museum's exhibition Treasures from the Vault. Sounds sort of like an EC Comics title, running through May 5th. Vandenbroek writes in the email that, quote, in Egypt, the Bible had already become canonized in the 4th to 5th century, but apocryphal stories and books remained popular among the Egyptian Christians, especially among monks. Whereas the people of the monastery would have believed the newly translated text, quote, in particular the more simple monks, unquote, he's not convinced that the writer of the text believed everything he was writing down. Quote, I find it difficult to believe that he really did, but some details, for instance, the meal with Jesus, he may have believed to have really happened. Vandenbroek writes, quote, the people of that time, even if they were well educated, did not have a critical historical attitude. Do they today? Miracles are quite possible, and why should an old story not be true? Well, what do you know? I guess I read the whole darn thing anyway. Sorry about that. An unfulfilled prophecy, one might say. Well, this is really interesting, the idea of needing to identify a shape-shifting Jesus with a kiss. Well, there's a very similar sort of a notion in Islamic commentators. I think Al-Tabari and another as well say that the reason he had to point him out, as if somehow Judas could see through this. I mean, they all seem to assume that. The reason he did this is that at the last minute, Jesus magically caused all the disciples to look just like him so they wouldn't know who to arrest. And of course, in Islamic thinking, the story issues in somebody else being crucified in Jesus' place and being made to look like him. Well, that's not quite the same thing as the shape-shifting Jesus, but both of them appear to me to be attempts to justify the presence of Judas in the scene at all. I've said this in a couple of books, right? Why are they there to arrest Jesus? They think he's a potential revolutionary. He is so popular that they have to arrest him on the sly, and they don't know which one he is? I like to think of this as, hey, which one of you guys is Elvis? Can there really be much doubt? Now, why the heck is he in the story? Well, just because someone had decided that when earlier texts, such as in Romans, say that Jesus was handed over or offered up, implying by his Father to die for the sins of humanity, somebody decided that paradidomi, the Greek verb, really meant betrayed, and it can mean that. You have to decide on the basis of context, but they decided it meant some backstab or sold him out, and so then they decided there must have been a guy who did it, and who better than somebody named Judah or Judas, because this was became sort of an allegory for, as Christians viewed it, Jews selling out their own Messiah. And so he gets stuck in the story where there's no natural place for him. And these Islamic and these later Coptic Christians saw the problem implicitly. And so they're giving a kind of an answer as to what the heck he was doing there in the first place. What they don't tell you is how Judas would have been able to see through the illusion any more than anybody else. Now, about the shape-shifting thing, where are they getting that? Well, that is certainly not unprecedented. That appears in a 2nd century work called the Acts of John. This was not necessarily a Gnostic text, though it may be, but it is at least a docetic text. Now, I think you probably remember we've discussed what docetism was before. Based on the Greek word dokeo, to seem. And the idea was that Jesus only seemed to have a flesh and blood body. He was really a spiritual entity who could not possibly have defiled himself with disgusting human flesh, the seat of all sin. But of course, he had to take on the appearance of it if he was to communicate with human beings. And that implies that, well, if he could take on one appearance, he could take on any appearance, just like the ancient Greek gods. They could fool you by taking on any appearance. Let me just read you this little bit from the Acts of John, from my own translation, if you don't mind, from the pre-Nicene New Testament. Here, John is telling his disciples many years later what it was like to hang around with Jesus. As I often point out, content aside, this form is what you would expect in the Gospels if they were actually based on eyewitness testimony. Now, this isn't, but at least the writer here knows that if he is to pose as one of the disciples of Jesus, this is what it has to sound like. That makes me think that the authors of the 4 Gospels were not even trying to pose as eyewitnesses. This guy was. All right, let's see. He says, once he had called Peter and Andreas, who were brothers, he comes next to me and my brother James, saying, I need you, come to me. And my brother, on hearing it, said, John, This child standing on the shore and calling us, what can he want? And I said, what child? And he replied, that one, motioning to us. And I answered, we have kept watch at sea too long, my brother. You're not seeing straight. Can't you see it as a man standing there, handsome, light-skinned, and smiling? But he said to me, him I do not see, my brother, but let us go to shore, and we will learn what it is he wants of us. And so when we had docked the boat, we saw him helping us secure the boat. And when we left there, inclined to follow him, I saw him this time as largely bald, but with a thick and curling beard, while Jacob saw him as a youth with only fuzz on his cheeks. So we were both uneasy and confused. What we saw, what could it mean? Subsequently, as we followed him, we gradually became only more confused as we pondered the thing. But next, something even more amazing appeared to me, for I would try to catch him off guard, and never once did I see his eyes blinking. They were constantly open. And often he would appear to me as short and ugly, and then again as a man as tall as the sky. Also another marvel about him, when I reclined next to him at mealtime and leaned back against him to ask him something, sometimes I felt his breast as smooth and soft, but other times hard as stone. Thus I was inwardly troubled and reflected, how can I be experiencing this? And as I thought about this, he turned and said to me, John, you see yourself in me. If your own heart is tender, then I am tender to your touch. But if your heart is stony, then thus also will you find me. There's more of the same. It's just really fascinating. An amazingly interesting account to me, anyway. And so this is a lot earlier than this newly deciphered Coptic text. Makes you wonder what the heck took him so long. But it's the same sort of idea of docetism. No true form, thus any old form he desires. And so that is not. And of course, the translator notes this is a much older idea. So it is pretty fascinating. Any likelihood it tells us anything about the historical Jesus? Not a chance. But then again, what's the likelihood that the Gospels are telling us about the historical Jesus? Well, I wouldn't bet on it. Let's get up to speed. Now, since I have gabbed so much already, let me just do a quick one today. Something you probably don't really need to know to understand the Bible, but you might run across it occasionally, and what the heck? Might as well be forewarned and forearmed. What the heck is a concubine? This came up on the Bible Geek the other day, and I had a vague idea, thought I knew, but I decided I'd better look it up. And it's pretty interesting. What's going on here? A guy in ancient Israel could have a wife or even wives, and a concubine or concubines. One example of this appears to be Father Abraham. His wife is Sarah, but she seems unable to bear children, so suggests that he impregnate her maid Hagar, who then gets some kind of dignity in the household. Well, Abe doesn't marry her, so she would count as a concubine. And so there's one. Another one is in Judges 19, I believe it is, where we hear the blood-curdling tale of how this man's concubine gets mad at him and goes home to her dad's house, and he goes to her, presumably with flowers and candy, to woo her back, and that's not so blood-curdling. The rest of it is, because she meets with a rather nasty end. I won't go into that. I think we probably have even discussed it before is that in the Bible. But here's a tale of a concubine. So what gives? What status did a concubine have? Oh, well, let me just add one other thing. How about King Solomon with his 700 wives and 300 concubines? Must have been a busy man. Okay, so what's a concubine? Well, it appears that there was no formal marriage, though, again, that's a little vague because we don't really know what formal marriage was like due, I imagine, to sheer accident. No ancient information about that has survived. But for one thing, we do know that a legal wife brought a dowry to the marriage, some kind of money and property, whatever, to help the household get started, and also to make it less likely that the husband would eventually be tempted to divorce her because she'd take the dowry with her and he wouldn't want to lose the goodies, right? Sort of an anti-palimony agreement or something. Well, a bride would, but a concubine didn't have to, and probably couldn't, because it seems implied that concubines were of lower social status, and that's probably one big reason they didn't actually get married. It was figured to be beneath the station of the husband. So she becomes, I guess, what you might call a common law wife, but not officially. It's just a way of saying, well, yeah, she is kind of beneath him, but what the heck. And it appears also that if some other guy committed adultery with her, it didn't carry capital punishment with it. If somebody had committed adultery with a guy's wife, then both adulterers were supposed to be stoned to death. But not in this case. And of course, the point of that is, I'm sure everybody was pretty steamed about it, but the point is, well, she wasn't actually his wife. So there's a degree of wiggle room there. And so a concubine winds up being a kind of slightly informal second wife, often taken on to provide children if, as with Sarah, there was a problem with the official first wife being able to bear children. And however, despite that, the children that the concubine would bear to the husband would be considered legitimate children. So that's not an awful lot, but at least we can surmise that much about what a concubine was. It's kind of a neat word. I always like it. I mean, even if you don't know what it means, it's a fun Bible word. What would a concubine be today? Maybe a surrogate mother? I don't know. Interesting. All right, how about a couple of questions from our imaginative and erudite human Bible listeners? What a group, I love them. Steve writes, what in the world is going on in Matthew 27, 51 through 53? It seems inexplicable to me why the author of Matthew would write such a thing. At that moment, I always like to do my Heston thing. You know, he did tape record the whole Bible. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people, or saints, some translate it, hagioi, who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. I mean, if you don't do Heston, you really cheat yourself for the full value of the word people. Anyway, because, as you know, Soylent Green is made of people. Anyway, sorry. What is going on? It seems not inappropriate to allude to a science fiction or horror film when you're dealing with a kind of a gospel version of Night of the Living Dead. So what's up here? Well, let's just say it looks very likely that what we have here is a kind of narrative statement of theology. Either simply the notion that Christ is the first fruits of them that sleep, as it says in 1 Corinthians 15, that his death his resurrection marks the beginning of the general harvest of the dead expected for the end of time. And of course, the early Christians believed that they were right on the verge of the end of the age. And so Matthew can't show you that happening. right? But he has what I guess they call a proleptic version of it here, saying, well, you see, this is like a cameo of the significance of the resurrection, of the death and resurrection of Jesus. This is going to happen on a universal scale eventually. It was a bit confused as a symbol of that, because, of course, Jesus wasn't rising yet. He was simply dying. Now, again, they must have thought of it as kind of a complex, so that the death and resurrection would lead to the resurrection of the dead in general. And so they're going to have it happen here. That is still a little confused, and that is why someone has probably added the phrase after his resurrection. It looks like, in fact, I think there's even a couple of manuscripts that don't have it, though I'd really have to double check on that. You see, when I start these things, I never expect to bloviate as much as I wind up doing. But so it looks like someone has said, they came back from the dead when he died, but they at least waited to go trick-or-treating until the resurrection. Yeah, okay, that mitigates it somewhat. They didn't want to just rewrite the story completely. A variation on this explanation, which is still kind of weird, but I mean, there's got to be some crazy thing going on, right? Another variation is that this is already an instance of the harrowing of hell doctrine, that the dead, the righteous dead of the pre-Christian dispensation were kind of waiting around. None of them could go to paradise. Well, that isn't much of a stretch, because throughout the Old Testament, you really don't have anybody dying and going to paradise, right? They just go to this sort of subterranean parking garage called Sheol. Well, all right, a new era has dawned. The death of Jesus redeems humanity, at least the righteous, and so the righteous ones, the holy ones, are allowed to get out of Sheol finally, and so they go to heaven. But why are they appearing on earth? Yeah, why are they showing up in Jerusalem? That sort of implies that they are recently dead. So, that's not exactly the harrowing of hell idea. Yeah, it would be included in it. But if the writer actually means Old Testament saints, Noah and Abraham and David, these guys went into Jerusalem and showed themselves, how would anybody even have known who they were? I mean, it's not like it was a Purim party where people dress up in costume. What, they have little name badges? Hello, my name is Melchizedek or something. So it may be that story is poorly thought out, or those problems with it may indicate that's not what the writer meant. So we have a kind of a handful of poor choices here. I'd like to note here that by racking my brain for stuff like this, it sounds rather similar to the gymnastics that apologists use to defend this as a historical event. Anything but the kitchen sink. Well, of course, I'm not doing that and don't have sympathy for that, but I do have to admit, the writer must have had something in mind, right? Something must have been going on in his head. So, I guess we have to try to conjecture what that might be. Now, one other point about this, which I find really interesting, Jehovah's Witnesses commentators, it needn't be that they are, just want to give credit where credit is due. It doesn't serve their doctrinal interests, as far as I can tell. It's just sharp-eyed thinking. They said, now, wait a minute, this isn't just recounted in connection with the fact that Jesus died. Well, yeah, it's linked to that, but it's listed in a series of seismic events, right? There's an earthquake, the rocks split, you've got rocks breaking up. Well, maybe all this means is that if you continue the logic, rock tombs like that of Joseph of Arimathea that'll be introduced shortly, these rock tombs broke open, and I guess that actually happens in earthquakes sometimes, and the bodies of the righteous buried there were exposed to sight of passers-by, and that's what it means when it says that they appeared to many. Now, I don't think that quite works. but it almost does. And because it says they went into the city and appeared to many. That sounds like the writer does mean they got up alive and went in and knocked on the door in a kind of anticipation of the, what is it? I think it's W.W. Jacobs' story, The Monkey's Paw. Suppose, however, and I think they're really on to something, suppose that originally the story simply said that the tombs were opened and the bodies were exposed, just to give the reader an idea of the magnitude of this earthquake that Matthew has basically created as special effects. And now we know, I think it's very clear, that the Gospel of Matthew has various layers to it, that it's not just a revision or a redaction of Mark's Gospel, but that there were later redactions of it on the way to the canonical text we have. My guess would be that the witnesses are right, that that's what it originally said, that the earthquake shattered the seals of the tombs and broke them open and bodies were exposed. It was that much of an earthquake. But somebody later on, perhaps in the interest of bringing in these notions I've mentioned already, Christ as the first fruits of the resurrection or the harrowing of hell, somebody added this business about them getting up and going into the city. That would be my guess, because why the connection with the breaking of the rocks? So I think maybe they don't put it this way, right? But they're good fundamentalists. They want to say, what it says happened, but as rationalists, they're trying to say, well, maybe what it says happened was not quite so spectacular. I don't think you can quite make that adjustment with a straight face, but I think what they have pointed out is evidence that originally it read a bit more modestly, but in a way that would actually make more sense in the context, and that somebody revising the text has added this crazy Night of the Living Dead scenario. So as you can tell, I really am interested in this little issue, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Another question, Tom says, it's always fascinated me that throughout the Bible there is a lot of emphasis on the importance of the continual worship and adoration of God. I can understand praying to a deity for intercessory purposes, but what reason, if any, is given in the Bible for repetitive worship? How does this relate to other religions preceding the Judeo-Christian one? Oh, I'm glad you asked that one. The reason is not, as far as I remember, explicitly given in the Bible, but by reading a lot of these Psalms, for instance, which were a huge number, which are hymns of praise, you can pretty clearly, I think with certainty, infer what the reason was. Now, I hope that in your religious education you have watched a couple of Monty Python flicks, of course, the indispensable Life of Brian of Nazareth. And that's a classic. But I'm referring here to The Meaning of Life. In it, there is this great scene in this Anglican boys' school and in the chapel service. And Michael Palin is the priest in charge, and he starts on this long, obsequious, ass-kissing prayer. "Oh, Lord, you are so big, so incredibly huge. All of us down here are really impressed, I can tell you," etc., etc. That's a little bit caricatured, but not by much. If you read the Psalms, all this stuff about how you led your people out of Egypt and you've done this and you destroyed the bad guys and you created the world and you founded your throne on righteous. What, you don't think he knows this? Is God so senile he has to be reminded or something? No. What is the point? Well, pretty quickly you start hearing the intercession, as you say, and the petitions. You're buttering up God to praising him, to incline him to answer your prayers. There's a little element even of holding him accountable when it says, well, you did all this for our ancestors. Here we are worshiping you. Surely you'd want to do the same for us, right? So it seems to me that is pretty clear. This is what is called sometimes a sacrifice of praise. It has the same function as offering a plant or animal sacrifice to God or the gods, but without the element of feeding them. The ancients believed that the gods had to be strengthened and nourished. You find that in the Rig Veda. You find that satirized in Aristophanes' The Birds. Great piece. But here it's feeding their egos, and it seems that's pretty clear also in the Rig Veda, where you've got a different slate of gods, but the same thing. Oh, Indra, you saved the world, you defeated the dragon Vritra, you did this and that, and we just can't get enough of your mighty deeds. By the way, would you mind answering these prayers for us? So it seems pretty clear that's what's going on there. But it does imply that if God wants this, God is a bit of an egotist. And here I just can't resist reading my favorite thing from Alfred North Whitehead, which conspicuously does not conclude his philosophical writings, which are just brain-breaking. Here's what he says to a friend, Lucien Price, in Price's collection, Dialogues of Alfred North Whitehead. As for the Christian theology, can you imagine anything more appallingly idiotic than the Christian idea of heaven? What kind of deity is it that would be capable of creating angels and men to sing his praises day and night to all eternity? It is, of course, the figure of an oriental despot with his inane and barbaric vanity. Such a conception is an insult to God. I love that. I think that's part of the unofficial Price Bible. Yeah. What would God? I mean, it's like the flip side of this issue of can we really enrage God by our sins and blasphemies? I don't get mad at an ant who bites me. I don't like it, but I'm not going to rage against the ant. And God supposedly can't even feel that. He's like Superman. Can God really care what nothings like us would think about him negatively or positively? Well, I kind of doubt it. Now, we depend on your questions, so I want you to send in more and more and more. One more goodie today. Is that in the Bible? Now, you probably know about this, but you might have thought it was a rumor. It's so wacky, and it's pretty brief, and it raises a question I can't really answer, but it's in Leviticus 11:20. Now, you may have thought there was nothing interesting in Leviticus, except all that stuff about homosexuality, which we sort of wish wasn't in there. Let's see. Have you been tempted lately to eat any insects? Just mentioned ants. Some people do have chocolate-covered ants. I've never seen them offered. But Leviticus wants you to be pretty darn careful about which bugs are on the menu. Listen to Leviticus 11:20 through 23. All winged insects that go upon all fours are an abomination to you. Yet among the winged insects that go on all fours you may eat those which have legs above their feet with which to leap on the earth. Of them you may eat the locust according to its kind, the bald locust according to its kind, the cricket according to its kind, and the grasshopper according to its kind. But all the other winged insects which have 4 feet are an abomination to you. Well, I would sort of think it's pretty easy to keep that commandment since there are not any 4-footed insects. How could this even be in there? I mean, is that in the Bible? Yes, it is, but it's really a mystery. Now, I'm not saying the idea that there's certain insects you might want to eat and others you wouldn't. There are rationales for that. It has to do with the ancient taxonomy. I'm not going to get into that. I think I have before. But that's not what I'm so puzzled at. How could they have thought there were insects with 4 legs? Now, in the beginning of it, you say, well, they go on all 4s. Now, that doesn't really commit you, if you say that, to believing that they only have 4 legs. I mean, it's just it just means they crawl on the ground on the end of legs. I don't know what that leaves out, but not an insect, but a creeping thing. A snake doesn't, right? It has different sort of locomotion. Well, yeah, I could see that. But at the end, it actually speaks of insects that have 4 feet. Well, if you can figure out that one, let me know. I guess this isn't unprecedented. Aristotle made some pretty wacky claims about animal anatomy and physiology. I guess you just have to assume that sometimes they didn't check their notes very well. I mean, these guys weren't Charles Darwin making, or Audubon, right, making sketches and careful notes. I suppose even at that, it kind of dumbfounds me as to how somebody wouldn't have noticed that there aren't any 4-legged insects. I mean, even the plastic ones, the cooties, right? I think even they have 6 legs. I don't know. But again, if you can think of something, it is your duty to the Human Bible podcast to tell us what the answer is. But of course, this isn't a question. It's mine to you. So since nobody asked me this, I don't feel too embarrassed about not having an answer. That's why I stick it in under, is that in the Bible? And it is. Now, maybe somebody will discover some Dead Sea Scroll manuscript where it says 6 legs and, we can just let it go, but I don't think so. Okay, thank you for being with us on the Human Bible, and be sure to go to our Human Bible store and get a Human Bible t-shirt. And in fact, if you want, you could just pick out a church and go to it, even if you're not ordinarily a churchgoer, and consider it a witnessing wedge, as we used to say, those of us who were once fundamentalists. And people say, oh, the Human Bible? What could that be? Well, you should tune in, and indeed, you should too next time. So thanks a bunch for being with us on the Human Bible. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Human Bible. To send us questions or comments on the show, which we really hope you do, you can email questions@thehumanbible.net or feedback@thehumanbible.net. We're also on Twitter @HumanBible, on Facebook @/TheHumanBible. And you can even leave a voicemail on our Human Bible hotline by calling 716-71-BIBLE. You can get all that information and more on our website, thehumanbible.net. Views expressed on the Human Bible aren't necessarily the views of the Center for Inquiry, nor its affiliated organizations. The Human Bible is produced by Adam Isaac in Amherst, New York, and features contributions from Debbie Goddard. I'm your host, Robert M. Price.